Hey everybody, I'm so excited to be here, to be back at You Got This. And I always like to start my talks a little bit differently, and I always feel like a good way to justify your talk topic is to have a quote from somebody really smart. So I wanted to start kind of today's presentation off today with this quote from Albert Einstein: "Learning is an experience. Everything else is just information." And hopefully that'll kind of set the stage for my talk today, which is learn smarter, not harder. How to hack your learning curve to optimize your educational experiences. So my name's Andrew. Like Kevin said, I'm a developer advocate at DevCycle. There's my information down there, but I'll tell you a little bit more about myself later on. What I'd like to do before I even do that, though, is give you a little bit of a snapshot about what we're going to be talking about in today's presentation, in today's talk, with a little talk TLDR, just in case you're wondering, do I go and grab a coffee early on? This is the opportunity for you to figure out, is this talk for you? So today's talk is going to be talking about how understanding your experiential learning style can help you optimize your approach to mastering new tech skills, which I think is something that all of us that are in the tech scene or tech adjacent are having to deal with nowadays with all of the changes. So in today's talk, I'm going to cover my journey from classroom to code. So why I'm kind of pulling this learning journey into the world of tech. I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about why we want to learn a little bit smarter. I'm going to talk about specifically how you can optimize your own learning experience, sort of using some of these sort of educational techniques. And then we're going to look at some real world examples of what this model looks like in practice, sort of using some of the things that we see in the tech space as sort of some great examples there. So to get started, why am I here delivering a talk on learning in the tech scene? Well, I've had an interesting journey kind of landing where I am today. I started my career back in 2010, working as a youth outreach worker in inner city. Spent about 5 years doing that before I transitioned into working at a university, running their outreach programs as part of sort of recruitment initiatives for the university programs that were bringing in new and future engineers and computer scientists. Then around 2017, 2018, I made the decision to go back to school and actually become a formal classroom science and technology teacher, to finish just in time for the pandemic to hit, at which time I shifted and joined the world of developer relations. First as a community manager at a Canadian startup called Battlesnake, which you might have heard of. If you haven't, go and look it up. It's very cool. And then in March of this past year, we were acquired by DevCycle, where I currently work as their developer relations manager and a developer advocate. So this is a little bit of my background, sort of where that learning in the tech industry comes from. So checkbox on that first task. But I think the next one is really kind of a big piece of why you're all here for this part of the talk, which is why exactly do we as folks working in sort of the tech sector in this tech adjacent job, why do we need to learn smarter? So new technologies are being introduced right now faster than they have ever been introduced before. Just like as an example, this is from the 2022 State of JavaScript, and this is sort of front-end framework usage ratios over the past kind of 6 to 8 years. And you can see there sort of for 2016, 2017, we were only really dealing with 4 major front-end frameworks. It was React, Angular, Ember, and Vue. Now we've gone in just sort of 6 shortish years, despite there being a bit of a pandemic in the middle there. We're now sitting at just this huge number of frameworks. And this is just talking about front-end JavaScript frameworks. When you look at the technologies that we're having to deal with on a regular basis, this is just a small snapshot of just how fast things are growing and changing and being introduced in the world. So, just at the same time as new technologies are being introduced, we are flooded with potential learning opportunities connected to these new technologies. So, obviously, JavaScript's not a new technology. And so, you might not be surprised that there are over 4 billion different learning opportunities or learning resources and references that kind of come from that search of Learn JavaScript. But even things like Learn React and Learn Svelte, some of these newer frameworks, we're still looking in the millions and billions of results that are out there. And even looking at sort of one of the newest frameworks that was on that list, Stencil.js, there's about 50,000 results when you go learn Stencil.js. And even if you only spent about like 30 seconds to a minute, it would still take you over a month to actually review all of those results to find the right learning opportunities that might help you learn the things that you want to learn. So technology is moving faster than it's ever moved. We've got more learning opportunities than we've ever had before. Yet learning and development resources are projected to shrink in the very near future. So these stats are from a recent report from Cornell on workplace training, and they went and talked to senior HR leaders, and 75% of these leaders that were surveyed said that economic uncertainty was impacting their L&D strategies. And then almost 50% said that because of this, they will be spending less on learning and development in the upcoming year. So that's a fairly good reason to sort of be really focused on this concept of learning smarter, because we've got technology moving really fast. We've got learning opportunities that are just continuing to grow, and yet we've got a new environment where the resources that our companies are able to provide are limited, and also just time is much more limited, and so many resources are restricted, far more than they ever have been. So with this in mind, how might we optimize our learning in this more resource limited context? Well, I kind of foreshadowed this with my background earlier, but I personally think for any problem that exists out there, a teacher has probably solved it. So pedagogy to the rescue. And if you've never heard the word pedagogy before, this is your like $5 word that you can take away from this talk. Pedagogy is just teaching techniques and practice. And really what we're going to be focusing on in sort of this optimizing today is kind of looking at some of how we can use some core teaching theory applied in this context of the tech industry and our jobs in this really forward thinking industry to really level up our learning. All right. So there's lots of pedagogy, there's lots of theorists, and there's been lots of things over the years. But there was one particular pedagogical theorist, one particular educational researcher and social scientist that I thought really had a great theory that I thought would be helpful and that I kind of wanted to present to y'all today. And that is Dr. David Kolb. Wrote a paper back in the 80s on something called experiential learning. And you're going to discover a little bit more about what experiential learning is today, but I'm pretty sure you can put those two pieces together. But this quote really kind of encapsulates his theory on learning and how to make learning really meaningful. So learning is the process where knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. And so knowledge is actually coming from this combination of grasping experience and transforming it into something new. Amazing. So theory, awesome. Got another great quote from a very smart person. We've got a good theory. It's been used lots of places. Fantastic. But how does that help you? How can you actually use this quote here to optimize, to level up that learning process for yourself? Well, thankfully, educators love like practical usage of things. That pedagogy is the theory and practice of teaching. And not only did he come up with a great quote and obviously an equally great paper that I super encourage you to go and check out, but Dr. Kolb also came up with or developed something that has become fairly well known in education circles, which is called Kolb's experiential learning cycle. And so that you might also hear this reference if you Google this afterwards as Kolb's reflective learning cycle or just Kolb's learning cycle. It's a four-stage process that he theorized was kind of what would allow for you to grasp and transform those educational experiences in a really meaningful way. So, this probably looks like a lot. There's a lot of words here that just don't quite make a lot of sense in terms. And so we're going to take a minute or a couple minutes and just kind of walk through exactly what this actually means and what each stage of this is. So, um, things start in the world of experiential learning, in this experiential learning cycle, with the experience, the concrete experience. And this is also kind of known in this cycle as the feeling stage. So this is a stage where you're having a new experience and you're kind of absorbing those initial impressions. You're sort of seeing something and you're taking in all of what you're seeing and feeling that experience. And I thought, all right, we're doing this educationally. I need to make the tech connection. And so I figured React is super popular right now, more popular than it's ever been before. Let's use React as sort of our example here to kind of give you a concrete understanding of what this is all about. So for this kind of feeling stage, this is kind of the stage, like imagine that you are first getting into React, you discover React and you kind of hear about this thing called JSX and you're like, oh, JSX sounds kind of cool. And you start to like investigate it and you're like, this is a little bit much. I don't know if I'm quite there yet. So that you're in the feeling stage right now. That is where you are. That maybe React isn't your language, maybe whatever framework or tool or new technology. But imagine that first experience. That's kind of your concrete experience. So as we said, experience isn't enough. We got to transform that experience and we've got to grasp it and transform it. And so the second stage that we move to from here, from that feeling stage, is into this reflective observation or reflection stage, the watching stage. This is where you as a learner are reflecting on experience and doing that from multiple perspectives. So this is where you are in this React world and you're in the JSX world and you see it and you just kind of take a step back and you're like, to figure out how JSX fits into this. So you might go and look at the docs now. You might go to Google and start looking stuff up. This is where you're kind of observing. You're looking around for information that can help you kind of make sense about what you just experienced. So again, we've kind of had our feeling stage. We've now moved into our watching stage. We've kind of had it and we're moving in. So then we move on to our third stage in this experiential learning cycle, this concept of abstract conceptualization, and kind of this is the thinking stage. This is where you're sort of taking what you felt and what you've seen and kind of making sense of all of it and kind of figuring out how things work together. This is where you've read the documentation and you figure out JSX and I think this makes sense. I think I know how this works together. I think I could start to apply this learning to kind of what I've experienced. So you felt, you watched, you think. And that brings us to the final stage of this experiential learning cycle, which is active experimentation. This is the doing stage. This is where you're testing out these new ideas and lessons that you've gathered to actually do something. So this is where you've felt it and you've read it and you've theorized about it, and now you're actually applying that. So this is the building stage. This is where you're like, all right, I think I can do this. I think I can use JSX and React. And so we've gone through and we felt, and we watched, and we thought, and we did. And this cycle continues. And if you're an engineer, this might remind you of the engineering design process or design thinking process or any of these other processes out there. It's this iterative piece of you have an experience, you do a little bit of reflection, you ponder it, you do something, you iterate, you go through this process, and it just continues and continues to really kind of make the most of these learning experiences, really focused on the idea that learning goes beyond just reading about something or watching something, but actually goes to doing something. So great. I feel like we all kind of work in a world where we get it. Experiential learning, really powerful. So experience and reflecting, making sense and trying things out, that's kind of key. And I would say that I think one of the things that often gets lost is this idea of reflection. And so like doing a thing and then reflecting on what happens is a really powerful takeaway from this talk as like a thing that comes out of this experiential learning cycle. But I presented a problem earlier, which is, there are so many new technologies and so many learning opportunities, and it's so limited. So how does understanding that there's this 4-step cycle actually help us navigate this massive amount of learning opportunities that exist out there in the world? Well, thankfully, Kolb not only focused around having a cycle that sort of is a valuable tool to follow, but also had developed something called learning styles, which follow along with this same cycle of feeling, watching, thinking, and doing, but sort of has you look at where you fall within this sort of cycle as generally having a preference to, and sort of the 4 different stages are represented along sort of 2 continuums. Sort of the thinking, feeling is along that grasping experience continuum. And then the doing and watching is transforming that thing that you just experienced into that learning and that knowledge. So, and the theory here was that we're all kind of generally driven towards one of each of these. So you're generally more of a thinker or a feeler, and then more of a doer or a watcher. And it's not universal. A lot of people fall in different places, but it is sort of the theory that has kind of made up these learning styles. Sort of has most people having a general preference towards one of these 4 areas. So let's start in the same way that we just started before, kind of at the top, and we'll start kind of top right-hand corner, I think, here, with our diverging learners. So diverging learners, you are the feeler and watchers. So these are people that prefer to watch and reflect on what they saw before they jump into things. So you're the kind of person, you might be the kind of person that really enjoys sort of watching those live stream coders go through and do their thing, helping you understand it. If we are kind of focusing on this JSX example, these are the kind of people that are jumping in and watching these live coding teams and asking the questions. Maybe it's what you're doing here today and you got this. You might be a feeler watcher, and this might be a really great starting place for you to then kind of continue to move through the cycle, but this might be the logical starting point for you. So we move then from kind of our feeler watchers down to our watcher thinkers. These are the assimilating learners. This might be you if you're the kind of a learner that likes analytical models and abstract ideas. If you're a documentation lover, if you find yourself driven to dive into documentation right away, this might be you. So back to that JSX problem that we've been talking about, or the JSX concept with React, this might be that you're jumping into those React docs and just pondering over the deep intricacies of how to implement JSX in your project. Again, you might see yourself, maybe I'm a little bit diverging, maybe I'm a little bit assimilating. That's great. A lot of people will fall into different places here, but does kind of give you a little bit of insight. I'm sure there's folks that are watching right now that have said, oh, I feel like that suits me, or I feel like that fits me really well. And that's great. That's kind of what we're looking for today. Next up, the thinkers doers. So these are learners that like to solve problems and apply what they learn to practical issues. So if you're converging a thinker doer, you might be the kind of person that goes onto GitHub and you find a really well documented React project that has some JSX in it, and you kind of go through and you dissect that JSX and you're like, I get it. And then you take those concepts and you kind of massage them to fit into your project that you're working on. So that might kind of make you a converging learner. If that kind of speaks to you, you're that thinker doer. And then I kind of fit into this, but I certainly find myself falling into the last category of doing and feeling. So these are the learners, love a challenge and love using intuition. This is your like, I went to the create React app site and it said there's one command you need to run a React app, and you run create React app, and then you just start messing around with JSX and you're like, what is this? And you discover it, and you try and you fail and you make a mistake and you iterate and you go. If that sounds like you might fall into that accommodating stage of this kind of cycle. That might be the kind of learning that suits you best. And so what this really does is give you a really powerful way of starting to examine which of these learning opportunities are for me. Am I more of a diverging learner? Am I really focused on this kind of feeling, watching activity? Or am I just a person that likes to jump in and sort of like figuring out where you have a preference towards in these learning styles can help you really navigate those learning opportunities. If you see something that's just focused on the watching and like thinking about things, maybe that's not a learning opportunity for you. Maybe you need to start looking around and exploring things that fit more into sort of that accommodating cycle. And then that can allow you to kind of move through this process, regardless of where you start, whether you're a converger or a diverger or an accommodator or an assimilator. There's some place for everybody on here, and just allows you to work through and try out these different styles. So great. We've been talking about React, but not everybody's a React developer. I get it. So what might a technical learning opportunity look like for your style? So I got kind of 3 examples here that I'll go through pretty quickly to just give you an example. So our first example here is learning a new language. Let's say you're learning Python. So here, let's look at the diverger. So that feeler watcher. So this would be somebody that might go in and you might decide to just tinker around with Python in a Jupyter notebook. If you don't know what a Jupyter notebook is, now is your time to go discover it. And then like you reflect on it. Maybe you seek feedback. Maybe you go and talk to some people about it that are doing it with you. That's a good learning opportunity, a way to start for a diverger. For an assimilator, this is where you might go in and you might sort of grab a Python book or take a course, and then you're not going to start basic. You're going to go in and you're going to try some of these really in-depth, complex Python scripts. After reading that book, you're focused on like sort of seeing and really thinking deeply about things. You're this converger. You might go watch some videos, learn some syntax from tutorials, and then just go in and do some practical coding challenges. Maybe you go build a battle snake. Maybe you go build, maybe you go play some of these other online coding games. But that would be a really good place for a converger to really start for this example of a learning opportunity. And an accommodator, you're going to be the one that jumps in and builds that Python app right away. And when it doesn't work, you're jumping into things and figuring it out and learning that syntax as you go. All right, so that's one example. Let's try another example, something more kind of ethereal, I guess, adopting DevOps practices. So for the diverger, you're probably somebody who is going to go into a DevOps workshop, brainstorm with some teammates, and then get some different perspectives before you actually kind of implement this into your daily practice. If you're an assimilator, you're a watcher thinker, you're probably going to go read a research paper or big article on DevOps and then try and use that to make a solid plan about how to integrate things into your workflow. So you're going to go really deep and focus on the depth. Converger, this is where you might go and take an online course on DevOps and then just add them into your project and maybe even compare and contrast outcomes and see which has done better for your project. And as you can imagine, that accommodator, they read about CI/CD and they are jumping in and sort of adding that pipeline into their project and figuring out what works and what doesn't as they go. All right, and our final example here, one that I think is really relevant for a lot of us, understanding cloud technologies. So here, that diverger, that feeler watcher, might just experiment with AWS on a small project. Maybe you follow a course, and then you're going to have a review. So you might reach out to somebody you know is like a cloud architect or a friend that does AWS and get their feedback. If you're an assimilator, you're probably going to start with that, reading some AWS white papers or best practice or case studies. And then you might actually adopt those into your current or some hypothetical projects and see if they fit against that standard. You're a converger. This is where you're going through, you're doing that AWS certification course, getting that certification. And then you're looking into sort of how do I create a cost-efficient, scalable architecture? And this is probably one of the scariest ones where if you're at a similar accommodator, I might suggest you start somewhere else. But this is where you're kind of jumping right in, setting up that basic AWS environment, logic configuring as you go. This one could go very poorly, especially if you don't have standards set in place, but there's lots of areas here. So maybe if you're an accommodator here, you might consider maybe moving into the diverger place and use that feel in a little slightly different way, but sort of gives you an idea of what learning looks like in these opportunities, especially if you start to identify that you fall into one of these categories. And so ultimately, sort of this feeling, watching, thinking, doing cycle combined with this understanding of where you fall into these learning styles is this powerful tool that really helps you to optimize your learning in the world of tech and far beyond it. All right, so let's look at some key takeaways from kind of today's talk. First thing, navigate with style. Know your learning style. It can help you in a huge way in navigating learning opportunities. Second, reflect to perfect. Experience is not it. Reflection on experience is crucial. There's a lot of quotes out there about this. Experience plus reflection equals learning and knowledge. Second last one, application accelerates mastery. I think this is something that we all kind of get in this world. Studying is great. using that knowledge in a practical way is a really valuable way to deepen your understanding. And last but certainly not least, iterate to innovate, continuously revise and apply those concepts, continue to go around that experiential learning cycle to really allow you to grow and learn and really sort of level up and learn smart, not hard. So that's it for me. Again, my name's Andrew. Here's where you can find me on social. Here's where you can find me on my Edge links to check out some of my other talks. And thank you all so much for listening. And I'm super happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks, everybody.